agenda.
Good morning and welcome to the program. Opposition leader Tony Abbott has rejected a Greens call to give farmers veto over coal seam gas operations on their land, even though last week Mr Abbott said that farmers have the right to say no to mining exploration. Coming up on the program, I'll be discussing this issue and all the other issues of the day with our panel, Senator Mitch Fifield and Labor MP Andrew Leigh. First though, I spoke to the Resources Minister Martin Ferguson a little earlier this morning. Good morning, Minister. Thanks for your time. Tony Abbott says the Coalition supports a vibrant coal seam gas industry, but that expansion of coal seam gas should be in harmony with the rights of landholders. What's wrong with that position, supporting both but done in harmony?
Tony Abbott went further, actually said foreign investment is not welcome in Australia and that farmers would have a right to veto. You know, it's not for us as a Commonwealth to intrude into the constitutional capacity of states historically to actually regulate on-land mining activity. We're talking about a $45 billion investment in Queensland in three major coal seam methane projects which represent clean gas. The industry itself understands the need to properly consult farmers. Some have done it better than others, but the message has gone out. You need to lift your game and engage with farmers. There is no right to veto, in the same way which Tony Abbott historically opposed the right of veto for the Indigenous community in terms of native title.
But he didn't say he was opposed to foreign investment. He simply said he supported the farmers' rights to say no to miners coming onto their land. What's wrong with that?
He sent a very clear message to the international community, and Australia is built off the back of foreign investment, that he is not as open-minded on foreign investment as others. And people got to understand that this was also not foreign investment. This is two major Australian companies, Santos and Origin, and he's now raised serious questions about the capacity of those two companies who invested over $30 billion to actually realise the value of their investment. And people should also appreciate, in terms of a clean energy economy, gas is clean energy. People can't have their cake and eat it too, and it's what the Greens want to close down the coal mining industry, then say you can't develop the clean gas industry.
So, but as you mentioned yourself, this is primarily an issue. Land use is an issue for the states. He says that the Coalition has no intention of changing this. So really, it doesn't have much impact, does it, if the states are going to continue to have governance of these matters?
Well, Tony Abbott's all over the shop like the dog's breakfast. On Saturday he was saying that in terms of the mining industry, he's the friend of the mining industry. On Friday he was saying on the East Coast, as against the West Coast, that farmers would have a right to veto. We've now got a spokesperson out there with a different view today. I wonder what the view is going to be tomorrow, because in essence, Tony Abbott is showing time and time again he has no understanding of the fundamentals of the Australian economy. At pretty challenging times we need confidence, and I'm talking down the economy or endangering it, and he's going to say whatever he thinks is appropriate to suit the audience. A different view each day, just playing short-term political games. He is a rank political opportunist.
Mr Ferguson, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And with me on the program now, Liberal frontbencher Senator Mitch Fifield and Labor MP Andrew Leigh. Gentlemen, good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Senator Fifield, first to you. The opposition leader this morning says he's talking about prime agricultural land. That caveat was not made last week. He was saying flatly that farmers have the right to say no. He's obviously seen it fit to clarify those comments.
Well, I think Tony's point always was concern about the preservation of prime agricultural land. The Coalition is strongly in favour of the coal seam gas industry. We're strongly in favour of preserving prime agricultural land. But these are ultimately matters for the states. The states have responsibility for land title. The states have responsibility for access. The states have the ownership of mineral resources. So these matters are ultimately for the state governments.
So Mr Abbott isn't just a rank political opportunist, as Martin Ferguson said?
Certainly not. What Tony was doing was
trying to please two groups of people at once? No,
Tony was flagging a concern that there is in some states about the removal of prime agricultural land from production. I don't think that's a relevant concern. It's an appropriate one to articulate. And what this debate is really about, that we've seen in the community, is seeking to balance prime agricultural land, that important interest, and also accessing and exploiting mineral resources. I also think it's important that these issues are handled in a civil and constructive way. So between landholders and between those who are exploring, that there's courtesy. I think part of this actually comes down to good manners and courtesy.
Andrew Lee, that all sounds fairly reasonable from the good senator this morning.
It is all very reasonable. The trouble is it's not what Tony Abbott was saying last week. Last week he was saying if you don't want something to happen on your land, you ought to have the right to say no. And of course this is a pattern we see constantly from Mr Abbott. He speaks only to hand-picked audiences. He's very reluctant to take tough questions. On the weekend we in fact saw him running away from journalists' questions, literally. By contrast, we've got the Prime Minister out there through a series of major reforms, health, aged care, National Disability Insurance Scheme, willing to engage with broad audiences, willing to take the tough questions,
but on this
willing
issue,
to talk through these specific issues.
Explain to us the contradiction between what Mr Abbott said last week and what Senator Fifield has said this morning.
Well, last week Mr Abbott made an unequivocal statement to Alan Jones. He said that if you don't want something to happen on your land, you ought to have the right to say no. Today he's saying no, that's not what I meant. Really, what I meant was that the miners ought to have stronger powers. And when he's speaking to farm audiences, he wants to make a message that sits well with farmers. When he's speaking to mining audiences, he'll send a different message again. But Mr Abbott is walking away from any sort of semblance of policy. He's attacking scientists, he's attacking economists, he's ending up on that real far radical fringe. I mean, this is really, you see the Tea Party effect coming to Australia. A colleague of Mr Senator Fifield has actually called for an Australian Tea Party, and you can see Mr Abbott moving that way.
Let's hear Senator Fifield.
Well, I mean, Andrew's talking about being on the fringe of politics. Well, it's the government that is in a formal governing alliance with the Australian Greens. So if we're going to talk about fringe operations, we need to start there.
But when we're talking about that, on that Greens issue, Mr Abbott's position, as articulated last week on Sydney radio, was more in line with what the Greens are saying on this, that farmland should be locked up.
Oh, look, I don't think so. I mean, the Greens have never been a great friend of the Australian farmer, and I don't think that the Australian farmer
should the farmer have veto, though? Should the farmer of prime agricultural land have veto over the right to of a mining company to look for coal seam gas, for example? This is the private members' bill that they're looking to push.
Well, look, access to land is a function of two things: the title that the individual holds and their property, and the licence that's issued by the state government. So the circumstances of access to land are governed by existing law, and it's a matter for the state governments to determine which agricultural land should be licensed.
So what do you say to Andrew Lee's argument that Tony Abbott's simply putting messages out that will satisfy one audience, then clarifying them on another occasion? We did see him on the weekend not willing to elaborate before the journalists. Today he has, but seemingly has put some nuance to those comments.
Well, I don't think anyone could ever doubt or question Tony Abbott's support of the mining industry. We're the ones who are fighting the mining tax. We're the ones who are arguing on behalf of the mining sector. Tony was also saying that he thinks it's important that primary agricultural land is protected.
Yeah.
Now, that's a matter for the states.
Okay.
It's for them to balance.
Well, let's look at a few other issues. There are a lot to get across as Parliament returns this week. I want to look at the broad budgetary situation at the moment. The government seems to be softening expectations, Andrew Lee, on the return to surplus. Again, yesterday, a number of ministers changing the language here, that it's the objective to return to surplus. It's just a matter of common sense, is it not, amid a faltering global economy, that you need to change the parameters of that commitment. It can't be locked in stone. You're an economist, you know that.
Well, Kieran, it's important to start with the broad economic parameters that Australia is in. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the developed world, an unemployment rate of 5%, but plenty of other countries have 7, 8, 9% in the US. We've got a debt level that's around a tenth of most of the developed economies. So we're in very strong economic circumstances, and that's largely thanks to the timely, targeted temporary fiscal stimulus that Labor put in place during the global economic downturn. It's true that some of these international events will affect Australia. That's inevitable, even although we have a strong trading relationship with, say, a country like China. A lot of our trade goes to Asia, but invariably major international events will affect Australia. Our objective is certainly to return the budget to surplus. That's
objective. You do need to be flexible, don't you? Given the uncertainty that exists internationally. It'd be stupid not to be.
Kieran, we certainly expect to get the budget back into surplus next year. That's what we've been very clear in stating.
But that's stronger than your treasurer.
This is very, very clearly stated, and let's remember what we are talking about here. We have a whole lot of developed countries that have debt levels equal to their entire national GDP. Australia has a very, very small level of debt. A small fraction, the government debt is a small fraction of what the typical households
largely
debt
due
would
to the savings undertaken by the coalition government, as I'm sure Senator Fifield will interject very quickly about.
But Labor's plan during the global financial crisis saved jobs. It was absolutely important to put in place those household payments and the infrastructure stimulus.
We've had that debate many times.
Well, but it's an important context, though, Kieran. If you forget that we saved 200,000 jobs in the GFC, then you start having this silly debate over very small.
Okay, well let's look at the Liberal side of things now, because there are numbers floating around, some enormous numbers. Joe Hockey confirmed at the weekend that a running number was $70 billion in savings. Now, I suppose the flip side of the question put to Andrew Leigh can be put to you and your colleagues in a context of an economy which is facing, a global uncertainty. It might not necessarily be the time to be slashing tens of billions of dollars of public spending. Would you concede that?
Well, it depends. If you assume that there's absolutely no government waste and no mismanagement, then who knows?
But $70 billion is, as the Prime Minister said, Medicare spending over 4 years. It's a lot of money.
Well, Kieran, we have a range of commitments which we want to give effect to, and we also want to cut out government waste. So we are going to cut our cloth accordingly. Had we been in government, as we've said many times before, we would have had a very different starting point, because the budget would not have gone into deficit. The budget would not have gone there would not be the level of debt that there currently is. We would have managed. No, not at all. Not at all. We would have faced a very different set of fiscal circumstances. But we have to deal with the cards. We have to deal with the cards that we're dealt.
But you can't lock in this figures like this, can you? You know the way the economy works as well. If it's a sluggish time, it's not the time to be pulling money out, is it?
Well, you'll have to wait and see when we release our full costings before the next election. But the issue of the moment really is this government's running away at 1,000,000 miles an hour from their commitment to get the budget into surplus by 2012-13. It was an absolute promise, no qualification, no equivocation.
Gents, I've got to interrupt because we've got Tony Abbott's doorstop his news conference. It's just come in. We're going to bring it to our viewers now. Let's play it for you.
This is the week in which we will mark the first anniversary of the Prime Minister's infamous promise to the Australian people before the last election: there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. This is a promise that will haunt the Prime Minister and the government every day until their ultimate political death. This government fundamentally lacks legitimacy, not because it lacks a majority, but because it lacks integrity. And nothing more highlights the government's lack of integrity than this monumental broken promise. The thing about the carbon tax is that it won't clean up the environment, but it will clean out people's wallets and it will wipe out jobs big time. But even worse than that, it's based on a fundamental act of political deception. And this toxic tax is dogging the government. This is the albatross around their neck. And if the Prime Minister had any real political integrity, she would accept this, and she would say that we won't try to introduce a carbon tax until it's been put to the people at the election. Now, there's another issue that I suspect some of you might want to ask me about. The Coalition won't support the Greens. We don't support the Greens, and we're not going to support the Greens because the Greens are just against mining, full stop. They're particularly against the coal industry, which they want to close down. Now, land use decisions are very important, but they are fundamentally a matter for the state governments. I think the mining industry is very important, and we've got to broadly support the mining industry. But mining shouldn't be allowed to destroy prime agricultural land, and mining companies should always respect the rights of farmers, and that's the Coalition's position. We support the mining industry, but we don't want to see prime agricultural land destroyed. We think that the rights of farmers should always be respected.
So, Tony, will you be talking with the states, especially the Liberal states, about this issue, about trying to find a compromise between coal seam gas producers and the farmers?
Well, I think that's exactly what the Coalition states are doing. I think we saw a very sensible and balanced statement from Premier Barnett on the weekend. Barry O'Farrell has already moved to allay public concerns with a moratorium on new coal seam gas exploration licences. We've seen Campbell Newman, I think, quite properly recognise that a lot of people in rural Australia today feel that there's a kind of David and Goliath struggle going on between family farmers on the one hand and billion-dollar mineral companies on the other. Now, it's important that we come to a balanced approach which acknowledges the importance of the mining industry to Australia's economic future, but which protects prime agricultural land and respects the rights of farmers.
Over the break, Labor seems to be making some ground in the polls. Do you think perhaps voters are warming to their policies?
Look, I think this is a Labor government which is desperate to clutch anything. I think their position is absolutely dire. And I think it's dire because I look at the field evidence, and everywhere you turn there are people who are desperately unhappy about Labor's carbon tax and desperately unhappy about the pattern of incompetence which marks this government. I mean, this is a government which has the Midas touch in reverse, whether it's pink bats or school halls or the live cattle trade disaster or the carbon tax or the mining tax. This is an utterly incompetent and untrustworthy government.
Do you support the idea of a Royal Commission?
I think people are entitled to have a debate about this issue, but the Coalition accepts that climate change is real. Mankind makes a contribution. It's important to have a strong and effective policy to deal with it, and that's what our direct action policy does.
Able to rule on climate change better than science?
Well, as I said, as far as the federal coalition is concerned, climate change is real. Mankind does make a contribution, and let's have a good policy to deal with it.
Tony, was John Alexander out of line suggesting that penalty rates should be either drastically reduced or abolished?
Look, I think it's very important that we ensure that jobs are protected, that businesses can prosper, and I think that's very important. Now, everyone's going to want to make their own contribution, and that's fair enough. As far as workplace relations is concerned, you've heard this from me many times, and you'll continue to hear it from me. We will have a strong and effective policy in good time before the next election, but it will be based on problem solving, not on ideology.
Do you agree with his
one last
suggestion?
question, guys. I'm sorry?
Do you agree with his suggestion?
Well, I think it's very important that we have a workplace relations environment that protects jobs and protects businesses, and that's the important thing. And as I said, I haven't seen his particular suggestions, but I think that's the issue. We've got to have a workplace environment which is good for jobs and good for businesses, because if businesses are able to flourish, they're obviously better able to employ people. Thanks very much.
Time for a quick break. We'll be right back on AM Agenda. Stay with us.
Intensify Rugby World Cup 2011. That's the Sugar thinking.
From a very young age, my father instilled into me that I can do anything that I want to do. Oh, some of the jobs, where do I start? Managing a couple of restaurants, breeding beef cattle, teaching igloo making. Now I'm actually a full-time share trader. I love share trading. It lights me up. It just gives me that total freedom to be anywhere at any time. As long as I've got an internet connection, I can work. There's no real trick to investing in the stock market. You need the tools to be able to make informed decisions, and CommSec actually gives me the tools. I can trust them, I can rely on them. It actually gives me the freedom to live a proper life, knowing that my business is actually in good hands. It's a great feeling. I think I've got 90% of my life and experiences still ahead of me, and that just thrills me.
The promise. The backflip. The backlash. The brawler. The backup. The big gamble. The Australian. The real stories from the nation's leading journalists.
Welcome back to AIM Agenda. With me, Andrew Leigh, Labor MP, and Liberal frontbencher Senator Mitch Fifield. Andrew Leigh, as you heard there, Tony Abbott was strong on a couple of points, including the balance when it comes to prime agricultural land. That's a fair enough argument. It was something being articulated by Senator Fifield earlier, and also on workplace relations, saying that they will have a policy well in time for the next election.
Well, Mr Abbott has clearly changed his position since last week. He was saying that farmers should have the right to say no. Now he's saying they should be respected. Those are very different positions that Mr Abbott's taken. One of the other things that struck me as interesting too was that Mr Abbott didn't reject the call by John Alexander, the member for Bennelong, to abolish penalty rates. Mr Alexander is a prominent Liberal Party backbencher. He wants penalty rates scrapped, and Mr Abbott seems open to the idea that you might do that. I think any Australian who's earning penalty rates should be deeply concerned about the impact that would have on their living standards.
Should he have knocked that on the head, do you think?
Well, what Webb said is that the important thing is productivity and the capacity of business to employ people. That should be the guiding principle in any consideration of workplace relations law. We will have a workplace relations policy before the next election. We have, however, said that we think that the government's own review of the Fair Work Act should be brought forward so that we can see where things are working and where they're not. And there's a fair bit of anecdotal evidence from business that they are finding particular aspects of it difficult and a disincentive to employ people.
Okay, a couple of quick issues to finish. John Kerrin, former Labor Treasurer, has quit the ALP, says factional players have got too much power. That's concerning, one of these respected elder statesmen of the Labor Party leaving.
Kieran, it's up to him, but I would say that certainly no Labor Prime Minister has left the party, unlike Malcolm Fraser, who's quit the Liberal Party because, in his view, it's become far too extreme. He's concerned about the strong ideological polarisation of the Liberal Party, the move to the right, the move to this sort of Tea Party constant naysaying. And you see that.
But John Kerrin says that he would not, that good candidates aren't being encouraged. In fact, they're being discouraged by factional players.
Kieran, I'm not in a faction. I'm certainly a testament to the fact that non-factional people are welcomed in the Labor Party elsewhere. It is the Labor Party is focused on ideas. We're focused on reforms. Aged care, National Disability Insurance Scheme, a historic health agreement. All of these things are very important for the living standards of Australians. And all Tony Abbott can do is go out and say no.
Well, let's look at one last issue we've got time for, and that is the disability insurance scheme that you referred to, Senator Fifield. This has been something you've been a strong advocate of for a long time. What's the next step here? It's obviously important to keep this disability insurance scheme front and centre of people's minds.
Look, absolutely. I mean, the system is bust. The Productivity Commission has made that clear. I think the momentum for change is irresistible. There does need to be a new national arrangement for people with disabilities and their families. The next step is the COAG meeting, and I think it would be really important for people like Bill Shorten to stop having pot shots at the states. The states are critical to getting a new national deal up, and there needs to be cooperation between the Commonwealth and the states.
But are you worried that comments from Colin Barnett of WA were lukewarm on this?
No, look, Colin Barnett said that there was merit in a new national arrangement. He did exercise or express some concern about the capacity of the current federal government to deal with complex change. I think that's an understandable concern. What we need is for there to be cooperation. There's certainly goodwill on the part of the states.
Okay, Senator Fifield, Andrew Lee, great to see you both. Busy week ahead. And that's all for AM Agenda. I'm Kieran Gilbert. We'll see you next time.
This program brought to you